Welcome. Welcome, Knowledge Noggins. Welcome, everybody. Hope you're doing well. Welcome to episode 15, Near-Death Experiences Part 2. I'm your host, Chet Banks, and you are listening to Pick the Mind. Pick the Mind. This is an exciting subject, so I'm going to do it again. The first person I will discuss is Carrie Kirk. Carrie Kirk is a lesbian who corresponded with Kevin Williams and described her near-death experience. This experience appears in Mr. Williams' book, Nothing Better Than Death. This is her story. The following happened to me during the summer of 1981. I was 19 at the time. It was a time in my life when I had pretty much decided that there could be no God. No great being in control of the world around me. If there were, he wasn't doing a very good job. I didn't realize it at the time, but once I had made this decision, I started going downhill. I became selfish. That is self-centered but not very self-concerned. I should mention that I had been having episodes of tachycardia for several years. I was never diagnosed up to that point with any kind of heart defect. Had I been asked, I would have denied any problems with my heart. I thought it was very normal to get lightheaded and almost pass out during periods when my heart would race. Duh. One evening, I was in the back seat of a car traveling to San Francisco from Los Angeles. All of a sudden, my heart began to race, and the nausea hit. Next, everything started spinning, and I could see lots of colors. Then I had a sense of blackness come over me, like a dark, damp cloud. I was terrified. I have never been so scared. In my fear, I said, "Jesus." Immediately, I witnessed a fight. It seemed there was a battle between being in the white light and this blackness. Immediately following, the light overtook the darkness. I found myself on my face in worship in front of this being of light. I felt a warmth. The most intense love filled me. It was an energy that penetrated every fiber of my being. I had never felt such complete and total love. That unconditional love I hear many talk about. I know there was conversation between us, but I cannot remember what was said. I feel like it was a time of healing for me, kind of a regeneration, if you will. In the next instant, I was floating above the car moving down the highway looking at myself in the back seat. I knew it was me sitting there, and yet I was up there. I wasn't afraid or confused. Everything was as it should be. There was someone there to my left. I don't think it was the same being that I had just been with. I had a sense it was a he. He seemed to be in a white robe or something. Funny, I never really looked at him. His identity seemed to be important. I think he was there to guide me. I didn't make myself go. It was more like he took me or led me. We began moving through space. I was aware of that because the stars and planets were passing by very quickly. It was very exciting. I felt so free. The order of the next series of episodes I am unsure of. I know each was a distinct episode, but it is hard for me to put them in an order or a time frame. The next thing I knew, there was a white room. I can't say it had walls, but it seemed to be somewhat enclosed. Maybe its boundaries extended to the edge of the light that filled it, and that is why I called it a room. There was a man in a white robe behind a podium with a book on it. I knew it was the book of life from the Bible. I remember thinking, uh-oh, that stuff was for real. I suddenly realized that the God I had been presented wasn't anything like the reality. I saw that it doesn't matter if you call him God, Allah, Great Spirit, or whatever. He is the same thing. The different religions just have different ways of explaining the same creator. I also realized that little voice inside us that prompts us to do good things comes from this creator. It is that light of love inside each of us. I don't remember specifically being told this, more like I just knew it. I came to a place, maybe a room, maybe a space. I was shown my life. If it was my entire life, I do not remember all of it. The only part that I remember now was just the last week or so, since I had given up on God. I saw how selfish I had been. I felt the pain I had caused one person in particular, and it bothered me very much. The things I had the most guilt for was hurting other people, lying, not being sensitive to their feelings, just being selfish. The fact that I was a lesbian didn't even seem to matter then. That was surprising to me, given what I had been brought up to believe. There was another room or area. It seems like there were others there. I sensed some were female, some male, but I can't say I recognized anyone. I was shown a diaphragm. I could see that it represented choices. A choice led to other choices, which led to other choices. Basically, actions have consequences. I began receiving all knowledge, or at least that is what it felt like. They were there teaching me. This didn't come to me as words like you and I speak, more as complete thoughts. When I think, it is generally in words and pictures. This is how I received the information, as complete words and pictures in my mind. As I could form a question in my mind, I had the answer. Not just the answer to the question, but the why and how, and the answer to every other question that the answer would bring up. Everything in the entire universe fits together like a jigsaw puzzle. Everything made sense. I remember thinking, I have to remember this. I looked over to the right, and in the distance I could see a beautiful valley with lots of people. There was someone looking out all over it. I felt that it was Jesus. I then looked down and saw a line, my foot. Yes, I did have a spiritual body, as did the others I encountered. My foot was stepping over the line to go to be with the others. Then I was told, if you cross that line, you can't go back. It would mean you would have to die. Funny as it may sound, up to that point I didn't realize I would have to die or was about to die. It never occurred to me. I didn't realize that I was separate from my body even though I had seen it in the car. I felt complete. I remember laughing and thinking this isn't how I pictured death. I said I wanted to stay. I was then told that people I was with in the car, as well as my mother, would not understand and it would hurt them deeply. I understood. At some point I was shown a map and was told to leave and go to Virginia. The angels were singing and it seems like I could see the clouds all lit up as it was nighttime. The next thing I knew, I was sitting in the back of the car. I could hear the most beautiful music. I didn't tell anyone what had happened to me for a long time. I felt out of place the next several days. I wanted to go back. I knew instinctively that I could not do anything to bring that about, though. I tried and tried to remember everything I learned when I was filled with knowledge, but it isn't there. Well, knowledge noggins, knowledge naggies, that was Carrie Kirk's NDE. Pretty interesting stuff, huh? This next NDE is by suicide. The man's name is Raymond Moody, and his story is the following. I was in my office. I opened the bottle of Darvin and poured the pills out onto my desk. Then I began to take them several at a time with gulps from a can of Coca-Cola. I took about 2 dozen of the pills and then sat down at the desk. For some reason, I called Paul Perry. I've done it, I said with a note of finality. Done what? He replied. I've taken pills and I'm dying, I said. I want you to be the last person I talk to. I could hear the controlled panic in Paul's voice as he started to ask a series of questions. What did you take? How many did you take? Where are you? I became somewhat angry at the line of questioning. I could tell that he wanted to get enough information to somehow intervene from Arizona. But I didn't want an intervention. What I wanted was good conversation in the final moments of my life. Look, Paul, I have researched death, and I know it's nothing to be afraid of. I will be better off dead. And that was genuinely how I felt. My eczema madness had put me in the throes of a paranoia and despair so great that I felt everyone would be better off if I was no longer around. No amount of talk could convince me otherwise. Paul suggested a number of possible solutions to my problems, including an agent and a CPA to straighten out my money problems and a new press tour to arouse interest in the book. I would hear none of it. I was ready to die. You know, Paul, being alive holds more fear for me than being dead. I have talked to hundreds of people who have crossed into death, and they all tell me that it's great over there, I said. Every day I wake up afraid of the day. I don't want that anymore. What about your children? Paul asked. They'll understand, I said resolutely. They know I'm not happy here. They'll be sad, but they'll understand. It's time for me to leave. I could hear some jiggling on the office doorknob as we spoke. Then there was a pounding on the heavy wooden door, a couple of raps at first, and then a persistent drum beat. Boom, 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 boom. Then a loud voice. Campus police, open the door. I ignored the demand and kept talking to Paul. Taking a few more pills as we spoke. Within seconds, a key was slipped into the door, and the door sprang open. Policemen rushed in, and before I could say much of anything, they had put my hands behind me and sat me on the floor. One of the policemen picked up the phone and began to talk to Paul. Apparently, Paul asked about the presence of pills because the policeman began to count the pills on the desk. When he did that, he dropped the phone on the desk, and from his police radio, he dialed 911. An overdose of Darvin has little effect on a person until it reaches a critical blood level. Then the painkiller overwhelms the heart-beating mechanisms and quickly stops it cold. A dentist friend who had seen someone overdose on Darvin said it was like falling off of a table. The person was operating fine until he just dropped to the floor. I knew that the same thing would happen to me shortly. All I had to do was wait. I sat patiently on the floor as the EMTs charged up the stairs with their gurney and equipment. Are you okay? Asked one of the EMTs. Sure, I said, and I was. Never better, actually. I was not afraid of death, but I had obviously become very afraid of life. Things began to happen fast after that. My chest felt very heavy, and I had the feelings of slipping into a dark blue place. They hoisted me onto the gurney and strapped me in and rolled me quickly down the passageway to the waiting ambulance. As they loaded me into the ambulance, the world around me began to fade. The concerned EMT was in my face, trying to keep me awake. Another EMT was drowning something into a very large syringe, probably adrenaline to inject into my heart. Better get going, shouted one of the policemen as he slammed the rear doors. I could feel the ambulance accelerate, hitting speed bumps hard as we headed for the hospital. An elephant was sitting on my chest. My eyes were closed, or at least I think they were. Either way, I could see nothing. My heart stopped. What happened next is almost indescribable, but I will do my best to make it less so. I could feel myself separate from the world around me. In a funny way, it was almost like cellophane being pulled off of a smooth surface, one reality separating from another. I sensed spirits around me, helpful presences, who were there to guide me through this separation. I tried to see these spirit guides, but I could not make them out because I was surrounded by a light that was not of this world. I could hear them speaking, and although I couldn't make out what was being said, their presence was soothing and calm, and I felt a radiant love from them. I didn't have an opportunity to examine myself in this state to see what I looked like or what I was made of. And I didn't have the time I would have liked to try to make contact with the spirits either. Instead, I felt myself start up again as the doctors pumped my stomach and gave me a shot of a stimulant to the heart. The light went away, the spirits were there no more, and I came to in an emergency room. That's what it's all about, I said to myself as I lay there on the bed. I didn't feel I'd been dead long enough to have a classic near-death experience, but at least I got close enough to see the city limits. I was oddly pleased. After defining, naming, and studying near-death experiences, I could now say I had one, and yes, it was real. I lay in the bed reliving the experience. There was nothing unreal about it. If anything, it was almost mundane, as though I had opened a door and walked into a strange room. I wondered what would have happened if my heart had been stopped longer. Would the spirit beings around me have become visible? And were they people I knew and loved? Would the light have changed and become a palpable, mystical light so many talk about? Would my life have come back to me in review? Would I have been introduced into a life after life? I puzzled over these questions for some time and then settled on what I knew, that an extraordinary transformation of consciousness had taken place at that point of death. I did not go into blackness, as so many assume will happen. Rather, I found myself in a richer, deeper, and more real state of consciousness. I had gone somewhere that so many have described as heaven. I have found one positive side to my suicide attempt. Now when people come to me with suicidal thoughts, I can talk them with first-hand knowledge about this horrible urge. I freely share my own story of attempted suicide and tell them why I am glad I didn't succeed. I also bring in the data about people who have tried to commit suicide and had near-death experiences before being revived. These people say they will never again try to kill themselves, not because they fear going to hell, but because they have learned that life does have a purpose. Well, amen! That is Raymond's story. It's a good story. Suicide is serious shit, knowledge noggins. Remember to speak up to someone if you're contemplating killing yourself, because I believe life does have a purpose. And you are just going through some really tough trials that God has in place for you, so you can learn from them. If it isn't your time, God will let you know that, and He will send your ass right back if it's not. So just be tough, and let this life of yours finish what it has to finish. Okay, knowledge noggies? This next NDE is by another suicide attempt, but there is no name associated with this story, so I suppose we can make up a name. Why not? Let's say his name is let's say his name is Bill Big Sack. All right then, Bill Big Sack. Here is Bill Big Sack's story. After 38 years of the pain, terror, and shock of the momentous night in October 1960 still haunts me. Harder to explain is the awareness of God's unlimited mercy and forgiveness which followed my suicide attempt and continued right up to the present day. What I am about to relate is definitely not hallucination or self-deception. I relate what happened and hope it may help someone somewhere to recognize and welcome God's presence in his or her own life at the time when death may seem to be the only way out. If 38 years ago anyone had said I would walk the treacherous path of lost faith to the very pit of hell, I would have laughed. I had recently married back in 1948, a beautiful woman by the name of Pat. She was a popular girl and I felt very privileged to have won her. I was busy working on my goals as an accountant and was too busy admiring the silver lining that I couldn't even see the gathering storm clouds. In the ensuing years, all my hopes, dreams, and bright prospects eroded. Once a moderate and occasional social drinker, I started drinking more and more heavily, and before I realized what had happened, I had fallen over the edge into serious alcohol abuse. The edge was hell of lost faith, fears, impotence, and self-pity. After only 7 months of what I thought was the perfect marriage, I found out my wife was cheating on me, and that drove me further into withdrawal and booze. I, too, was to be blamed in wrecking our marriage. Every time a new affair came to light after that, whether it was just a short affair or a year-long romance, I said many hurtful things and did all I could to make her feel very guilty. Even so, she was out on a date when I finally decided to do something about what I viewed as completely hopeless and a degenerating situation. With Pat gone, probably for the night, I tucked our 2 boys and little girl into bed and listened to their prayers. Prayers at the time somehow seemed shallow and senseless to me. I found no assurance or hope in prayer. I had become a devout atheist. When the children were sound asleep, I collected the materials of what I thought of as my final escape. 2 bottles of sleeping tablets and a prescription bottle from the medicine chest, tranquilizers I had hoarded. With the addition of the 3 bottles of booze, I thought I had everything I needed to make my great escape. I recall the doctor telling me not to mix booze with these pills or it could kill me. Back then, I had no desire to die, but still, the conversation had planted a suicidal thought. I wrote a suicide note and shook out 5 tranquilizers. I mixed the drinks together with the liquor, and I toasted my wife's vacant chair. "Here's to nothing. Make that nothingness." The capsules slipped down easily, and the false warmth of the booze surged through me. On my way, I thought, and there was no turning back. My second drink finished off the tranquilizers, and my fingertips and toes began to tingle. Well, maybe the pills aren't going to work after all, I said to myself. I felt not drunk, but just a little dulled and a little lightheaded. I had a nagging fear that it would be stopped in my attempt as I had been in everything else I had come to consider important. So I downed another handful of sleeping pills. My hand was still steady as I poured the last of my bourbon. What can I do? What will I do if this doesn't work? I felt a burning sensation building in my stomach. My drinking habit had gotten so strong that a couple of drinks with lunch, a bracer on the way home, and 2/5 of vodka or bourbon when I finished off the evening were really hardly sufficient to dull my pain and frustration. I don't want to wake up with just another hangover and all my problems still gnawing at me. I don't want to wake up ever. I finished off all the booze and the pills and began to see a dark cloud-like formation, and it was coming towards me. It was coming right through the ceiling of my kitchen and came in and engulfed me. I felt myself moving through this tunnel at a very fast rate. I saw a light at the end of the tunnel and was wondering if this is where I was going. I didn't know if I was dead or alive at that point, but I do recall looking back at myself, passed out on the kitchen floor as I lay there completely oblivious to this other part of me which seemed to be heading towards something. Is this what death is? I wondered. No, came an answer from somewhere. I was shocked to see a being of incredible beauty, radiating great love, great compassion and warmth. It was a being of beautiful bright white light which had silver threads emanating from the center. I was hesitant to say anything, and then I realized that my thoughts were being read by this incredible being of light. No, he repeated again. This is not what death is like. Come, I will show you. I remembered floating with him over to a pit of some sort that contained a very depressing scene of a landscape devoid of beauty, devoid of life, where people shuffled around with their heads down and their shoulders bent forward in a depressed, resigned manner. They kept their heads down and looked at their feet and wandered around aimlessly, bumping into each other occasionally, but they kept on going. It was horrifying that I was going to be cast down with these confused lost souls, but the voice seemed to understand the terror. And it was relieved with the following words. This is a hell of your own creation. You would have to go back to Earth eventually and experience a new life all over again, faced with the same difficulties that you faced in this lifetime. You will stay with these lost and confused souls until then. Suicide is not an escape. I was shown a panoramic view of my life. The last 5 years, which had become so burdened with alcohol abuse, were the most painful things, the most painful memories I could even imagine. I was shown a picture of the effect that alcohol had caused on my young children's life and the effect that it would cause in their future. I saw the sorrow that my children would feel at the loss of their family and me. I was shown that their mother would not take good care of them and eventually they would be put into a foster home. I was also given a preview on how my alcoholism would influence my children's life if I continued to drink in the manner I had become accustomed to and stayed in that family relationship. I saw that all 3 children, 2 boys and a girl, would follow my poor example and each would eventually use the bottle to escape life's day-to-day ongoing stresses until each would then in turn become alcoholics like me. The sight of my precious young daughter growing up, marrying a fellow alcoholic, would eventually beat her and force incestuous relationships on their 4 daughters was more than I could stand. It was like a slap in the face, a huge reality check. I saw that if I shaped up my act and began behaving like a responsible father and role model, all 3 children would grow up to be happy and productive. That doesn't mean completely free of the struggles of everyday life, but they would have a chance at making their own way, independent of any substance abuse. I saw how my oldest son was going to be able to become an important, influential person in his time if I stayed around and behaved like a real father. I saw the downside of this future if I stayed in their relationship as the drunken, weak father that he would eventually turn to drugs and end up in prison for crimes that he committed while trying to get money for drugs. It was terrifying to me, and I decided right then and there this was not what I wanted for my children or myself. I was shown if I continued as a hopeless, pathetic drunk that I would not be able to escape, having to relive all the trials and traumas that brought me right up to the point of suicide. I would have to face those things again in another life, and it just seemed more terrifying than I even wanted to admit. I cried. The being of light seemed to understand that I was filled with a sense of remorse, compassion, and loving. He said in a stern voice, but that was still like a father speaking to a son, "Your life is not to do with as you please. Did you create yourself? Give yourself life? No. Neither can you choose death." I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. I cried even more. This presence in voice must be the Holy Spirit sent to me, I thought. The voice, now softer, continued to say, "I'm not done with you. Your work isn't finished. Go back and do what you were meant to do." The first thing I saw when I woke was a relief flooding my daughter's face. Nancy had awakened during the night and struggled vainly to keep the spark of life burning inside of me.
"Oh, Daddy," she said. "I was so afraid we lost you. You were so cold and I couldn't even feel your heartbeat."
In the kitchen, my wife was getting lunch.
"Come and get it, kids. Dinner's ready. And you can have some too if you can stagger your drunken self over the table,"
she added sarcastically. I felt completely exhausted and very hungry, but not at all hungover. For some strange reason, I didn't have the gut-wrenching pain that I had felt the night before after taking such an overdose of pills. Best of all, I still felt the inner love and peace and caring that had come from the night before. It would be pleasant to relate that life since then has been all perfect, but that would be a lie. Separation and divorce were heartbreaking, although I did keep the children. I wanted the children and they wanted me, and my wife's boyfriend didn't want them. I ended my job as an accountant and went on to become a professor at a local college, and it was a tough going. Using all my savings and retirement funds to pay bills and keep the family intact during a month-long job search cost me what security I might have had, and learning new job skills was both challenging and scary at times. Still, the peace and comfort I first knew while standing at the edge of the pit of hell have never left me or allowed me to lose my renewed faith and trust. Some friends can't understand why I don't feel bitter. Best answers lie in the 23rd Psalm. "Yeah, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me, thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me." Since my experience, I have found that I no longer fear death, that I have much more spiritual outlook, and I take my responsibilities of raising my children very seriously now. I am there for them, and I am proud to announce that their lives are coming along much better now that I have become the father I should have always been, and I have met and married a beautiful woman who is beautiful on the inside and who is giving me strength and courage to get through all of life's trials and tribulations. I will never forget my experience on the edge of hell and what it has taught me. The negative near-death experience is not negative when good comes out of it. I am now a pastoral counselor and do some bookkeeping for small businesses on the side. My children are on their own and have happy, busy, productive lives. I feel at peace. Amen on that one, Knowledge Noggins. That's a pretty good story from Bill Bigsack. So, if you're thinking of killing yourself, don't. Don't know what else to say, guys. Love you. Much love. And peace out.